About 2 years ago, I was a senior at this very high school, and I took a seat at my desk, and I had my master list of schools I'd been accepted into, and it was time to make a choice. And I had this really unique realization that what I was feeling was a very special flavor of dread. And after deliberating quite a bit, I realized I was at a bit of a crossroads. I had these two truths that were not very compatible. And so on the one hand, I knew I wanted to continue my education. I wanted to be surrounded by fiercely intelligent people. I wanted to be surrounded by people who had similar interests to me, people with completely contradicting interests to me. And I knew to the best of my ability that university or college was the place to find that. But on the other hand, I was tired. Being an upperclassman in high school was probably one of the most emotionally taxing things I've ever done. And what I realized was that those last 2 years had really sucked the kind of spiritual energy you receive when you learn new things about the world around you. And it was a feeling that I missed greatly and that I knew I needed to have in order to take full advantage of my college experience. And so with those two truths realized, I had to make a compromise. And so I took what is commonly known as a gap year. And the clock was ticking, I was about to graduate, and at the same time, our little friend here showed up. And so I had to make a choice, right? Do I continue on with this gap year into well, as far as we knew, a few months of restrictions and lockdowns and things of that nature, which would severely restrict what I'd be able to do? Or do I fold my cards and go on off to school and just kind of hope that love of learning returns? And I owe everything to my friends and family and teachers who told me to take that leap. And so that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. I'm here to talk to you about my vastly uninteresting gap year, but why I don't regret it and why I think it should be considered by other people, regardless of if it's trips to Europe or if it's a pandemic lockdown. And so answering this question feels pretty important, given the nature of how much collective time you all are giving me. And I suppose I've somewhat answered it, but truly the reason I'm here is to say the things that I wish someone had said to me when I was a very anxious senior in high school. Maybe to rephrase that, I'm here to say the things I wish I'd listened to when I was a senior in high school. Because active listening, I've learned, is quite important. And so I'd like to start by quoting this gentleman here. And if you don't recognize him immediately, this is John Cleese. He is one of the members of the British comedy troupe Monty Python, who is responsible for such classics as Monty Python's Holy Grail, Monty Python's Life of Brian, and Monty Python's Flying Circus. And in '91, he was asked to talk about how he creates creative energy and drive within himself and within the people around him. And to grossly simplify what he said, he gave us these two ideas of open-mindedness and closed-mindedness. And I asked you for the moment just to kind of put aside what you think you know about these two words, because I think the way he puts it is really interesting. He talks about closed-mindedness being a very goal-oriented state of mental being, right? You can think of it as a horse with those like traffic blinds. My parents are going to kill me; they're both horse people. But you know, you're fiercely efficient, but you're not really taking in the rest of the world. And it works, you know, if you're exercising, you're working out, or if you're a student even, right? That's kind of our default, right? Is we're just trying to get to the end of the tunnel. In our case, graduating. But then he also talks about open-mindedness, and that's the complete opposite, right? Is to best summarize it, it's kind of like this, right? We're just taking in everything, and we're not efficient, we're not goal-oriented, and we're not being productive by any sense of the modern definition. And the point he makes very carefully is that one cannot exist without the other. These have to exist in harmony, because if we're simply closed-minded, we're productive, but we don't really know why, and that leads to exhaustion and to burnout. But on the other hand, if we're simply open-minded, we don't actually get much done and we feel lazy. So with that out of the way, I'd like to continue. And what I found really interesting when I started reminiscing and thinking about my last year is you could actually simplify it into 4 distinct stages. And I think recognizing this is really important in underlining the fundamental benefits of what I did. So to start off, we have stage 1, which is relief. And this often manifests itself in the form of summer vacation, right, for most students. And it looks pretty much the same for all of us, right? We finished school. In my case, I graduated. And you spend time with your family. And if you're as lucky as me, you had some teachers who were incredibly formative and wished to say goodbye. And then you hang out with your friends, right? You go on COVID-safe trips, right? We all got tested and hit the road. And you stay up late watching movies and arguing about which Hobbit movie is the best. But then those friends start to leave because they did decide to go to school. And I have some of the smartest friends on the planet, let me tell you. But it made me realize that this needs to be an active endeavor. It can't be passive. I can't be following people around because you think to yourself, that won't be the fulfilling answer you're looking for. And so that leads you on to stage 2, which is confusion. Right? You've had for the last few months, you've had your head in the clouds. You've been very open-minded. At least you thought you were, just messing around with your friends and having a lot of fun. But then you realize, I've got a whole year in front of me, and if I squander it, I'm going to hate myself. And so what do? You go back to the drawing board, and you realize you've taken some notes. These were taken maybe early senior year, and these are diary entries and diagrams, and I even wrote a timeline planning it all out. There's things like Europe trips and getting my sailing license and doing all these very exciting things. But the thing that really interested me the most was this one on your left here, which starts off with, if I take a gap year, it needs to be done with purpose and intent, and I need to go in with a rough plan. And this was super sobering to read, because what plan? The plan I had involved, like I said, trips to Europe and your typical gap year things, right? I was going to carpe diem. But now that we had COVID, all of those were out the window. And so I wasn't quite sure what to do, so I kind of decided to create some footing, and so I got a job, I guess. I don't know what else to do, and so I worked at KCAT TV 15, which is on this very campus. And I have to thank Melissa Torin and Alexander Eischen greatly for such a wonderful experience. But I also knew it wasn't totally the kind of wild gap year experience I wanted. And so I tried to move on, but then I realized, no, gotta finish those college applications, because I knew that the ultimate goal of this year was to rediscover that love of learning and rejuvenation that I thought college could bring me. And so this was kind of my way to keep myself accountable. And so what you're seeing on the screen are the 44 essays I wrote between August, after I graduated, and the following February. I don't recommend it. Truly, I could not recommend anything less. It was soul-crushing in many ways, but it was also really interesting because this was my second time around applying to colleges. And it was the first time where this was the primary activity. And with a lot of these supplemental essays, the goal is to present yourself as authentically as you can to the admissions staff. And much more than the previous year, I felt like I was able to do that. I felt like I had a much better idea of who I was, not only because I'd thrown myself into this ether of a gap year, but simply because I was older and I wasn't focusing on school. This is what I was doing. And so that was the first time that I'd done something that was kind of going to provide fruit. But when this was all said and done, I had this realization, and I've gone through and I've graphed it for you. So you have cool stuff over time, and as you can see, it's pretty stagnant. There's a few peaks, but nothing that I'd look back on in a year and be like, hell yeah. And so that sends you into stage 3, which is panic. And I know, right? Lucky for you, panic is the shortest lived stage, because if you're anything like me, it's so intense that you can't help but get out of it. And so you panic and you're like, all right, I got to do something worth talking about, something worth doing. And so your brain immediately goes to travel, which is what people do, but you cannot hop on a flight because of COVID. And so you decide you'll road trip, right? So you make your car sleepable, and you decide you're going to hit all the big national parks in California. And it's a wonderful time. It's a very lonely time. It's a time filled with a lot of carbohydrates because you realize that's all you packed. But it's a really cool experience. And not only do you do it, but you decide to record it, because while you're going into film, at least you hope to. And so you figure, let's do some film stuff, right? I can't get these big fancy internships, but I'll hone my craft. And so yeah. I can't quite tell where I'd planned to sleep. The road has kind of disappeared straight through Joshua Tree National Park. All right, I've set up camp in Mojave through Death Valley. Wow, look at all of this. It's weird. It seems kind of counterintuitive to enjoy the desert because it's kind of nothing. But I think that's what makes it really pretty. In my essentially Prius of a car.
It's right there. And I'm pulling the pin.
I think the decision has been made to skip over that. I'm willing to bet that I'm the only person to ever eat hot soup in Death Valley.
This might be the prettiest place I've spent the night so far. You know, proved to myself again that I can take care of myself, and that's always a nice thing for a young adult to know.
And so this was a huge moment in my year, because it taught me a few things. One, it taught me that I was no longer restricted by the time constraints that school had provided me with. It was no longer, I'll do this once I get my homework done, right? I had essentially infinite time. And it also taught me that this was a place, following these kind of tangents was a place where I could find my love of learning again, and kind of that spiritual energy that I talked about. And so this really set me going, and this set me onto stage 4, which is agency, and this is what this has all been about, right? The past 3 stages have all been leading up to this, where you've gotten that all out of your system, and now you're ready to go. You're ready to take it by the reins, and time is the most exciting thing. It's no longer scary. And so when someone asks you to help out on a boat, you say, yeah, because why not? And so you do odd jobs, and you stub your toe a lot, because why are boats designed that way? I couldn't tell you. But you have a lot of fun, and it doesn't matter, because what else are you going to do? And you develop this really deep love for sailing, and so you come back and you decide you want to manifest that love into something, and so you build a boat, but that one it's not really a boat. It floats, but it's not a boat. And so you build a little bit of a bigger one, and this one is, wow, this one is sail mechanics. That's really cool, but it's still pretty small. And so you build an even bigger one. This one's 1.5 feet long. And I learned all about how sailboats work and function from this thing I built in my dad's workshop. And so you keep that going, and you decide to get your skipper's license. And an important thing to realize about this anecdote is this took months. This was not a weekend. This story spans pretty much the whole year. And I think it wouldn't have been able to happen without the evolution of all these stages I talked about and all this time that you're able to have in order to kind of let it all digest and be comfortable doing it. And so you keep going, and I decide, I've always fancied mechanical engineering and electrical engineering, and I built this machine that steeps tea for you, and it broke after the first use, but it was really fun. It was really cool. And I've skipped over pretty much everything I did, but what really hit home was towards the end, I looked at my bookshelf and I started reading during the gap year. I decided that was a way in which I was going to try and reclaim my kind of autonomy in terms of my love of learning. And what you see in that photo, those are more books than I've ever read in my entire life, and I read them in that year. And that's both a sad fact and a really exciting fact for me, because what it marked was I did that all on my own. I didn't need to be assigned it. I didn't need to do anything. And so I realized at that moment, when seeing all those books, that I had done what I'd set out to do. I'd gone out and I'd rediscovered my love of learning and exploring the world. And it doesn't matter what else I did, I could have done nothing. That was my goal, and I accomplished it. And so to return back to these 4 stages, I think one of the reasons it's important to draw them out like this isn't just because I think they're fairly universal when it comes to being presented this time of structurelessness, is because I think once you've gone through it, it starts to look more like this. And I think this is a skill I learned that for all of the benefits of school, and I think I'm a pretty strong proponent of the education system, this is something you can't learn, right? You are structured, and so you're not able to learn the skills of structurelessness. And I think this is the biggest thing I got out of the gap year, because I'm about to finish finals in a week, and I'm excited. I'm excited to not be confused and panic about what to spend 3 months doing. I'm ready to go. I'm going to feel relieved for a little bit because I think I deserve it after studying, but then I'm going to go straight on to agency, and I'm going to do stuff. And it doesn't have to be particularly productive stuff, but it's stuff that I want to do. And so I think one of the last big things I want to do is address the parents in the room, because a lot of the time when I bring up the idea of this kind of time away from education, a lot of it is, and this is from friends very close to me, a lot of the times the response I get is, well, that's great, but my parents would never let me. And that really, it like hurt hearing that, because of how wonderful it was for me and how amazing my parents are in allowing me to go out on this limb. And so for that reason, initially I was very anti-parent almost. I was mad, I was upset at all these kind of tiger parents. And then I had this very interesting conversation with a friend of mine who's in this room with her mother. And they both came to visit my school the other week as a newly admitted student. And we talked about a lot of things, and this presentation was one of them. And I brought up the idea of my kind of contempt for parents. And she said, yes, and I think we also need to realize the value in parenting. And I realized that I was coming from a very biased place. I've never had the responsibility of a person, right? I've never been responsible for someone's future, and I realized that then. And she made me realize that the thing that parents can provide us with is this kind of knowledge that can only come with time. And with that out of the way, I think what I'd like to leave with the parents in this room is that there were a lot of times during my year where I was filled with a lot of self-doubt. I thought, Jesus, I'm ruining this whole year if I'm not doing something productive. My friends at least are getting degrees, right? They're chipping a year off their degree. What am I doing? And whenever I felt that way, my parents would come to me and they'd hand me this parcel of trust. And they basically said, we trust you to go off in this random direction and do whatever you got to do and then come back. And that meant more to me than I can kind of put into words. And so I think parents understanding the value of that trust is beyond important. I'm doing great, thanks for asking. To return back to what John Cleese said, I think I also knew I'd made the right choice when at the end of the year I was bored and I was ready to go to school. I had done all my open-minded stuff and I was ready to focus. And so I'm at a school that I'm so lucky to be able to go to doing the thing I love, which is filmmaking, and I've even since then added a minor in environmental studies after being inspired by a book I read in that stack in the photo you saw. And I'm just having a wonderful time learning about the world and being around, like I said, fiercely intelligent people. And so I'll conclude this way. If you right now Google gap year or gap year TEDx or whatever into any search engine, you'll find a lot of very well-meaning and very inspiring people telling you that it's okay, you're not going to school, but you're doing all of these other hyper-productive things, right? You're dipping your toe into a career by getting an internship, or you're saving up money by getting a job, or you're becoming worldly by traveling. And so I suppose the reason I'm here is to represent the other side. What happens when, for one reason or another, those things can't happen? Say a pandemic, just to use a random example. And so I suppose if there's anyone in this audience that feels the way that I felt during my senior year, the nerves, the dread, but that little sliver of hope that you do think you want to keep learning, it's just not right now. I hope anything I've said tonight resonates with you in a small but meaningful way. Thank you.